Yesterday, the mainstream media was remembering the life of John McCain and his involvement in politics, but the world started to jump off and it got a little froggy yesterday. Let's go ahead and take a look at what happened. Yesterday, there was a couple of foreign policy stories that I ran across, and foreign policy is actually something that I like a lot, even though the United States and people tend not to be as engaged in foreign policy, or at least as much as we used to, ever since the end of the Cold War. But we got a renegotiated deal between the U.S. and Mexico yesterday. That was one of the big headlines, happened at about 11 o'clock yesterday. And there was a phone call with the president of Mexico and President Trump where they were discussing the deal, and Mexico is really hoping Canada will join in on the deal. Trump doesn't really seem to care as much. They kind of stiffed him, and he doesn't really seem to be that gracious. But as far as the deal itself is concerned, I haven't heard too many complaints, although I'm sure if I search hard enough on the mainstream media, I will find some. Because, as I was watching Shepard Smith yesterday, he spent 5 minutes explaining why this wasn't a good deal before they brought on the commentator, and she basically said it was a good deal. And some of the complaints was that it wasn't with the incoming government, but they were part of the negotiations as well. And Trump and the incoming Mexican government and the Trump administration have been negotiating. And I found this funny that Mexico and Canada just a month ago came out and presented a united front on the negotiations. And 1 month later, the United States and Mexico comes to a trade deal. And Canada's making it out like it's not that big of a deal, but she actually stopped. The Canadian foreign minister was actually in an overseas trip and is coming home to start negotiations right away. So this really shows what kind of importance Canada's actually placing on this and what kind of, honestly, threat to NAFTA that it is. They feel like they're going to be frozen out now, and they're taking this serious to the point of they're stopping other domestic or other foreign policy trips just to come back and start negotiations. So it looks like Canada's trying not to become on the short end of the stick with this. Now, the other story I saw, which was also interesting, more for a what-if effect, is Iran announced that it closed the Strait of Hormuz. Now, the Strait of Hormuz is important for the amount of oil and shipping that goes through there. A large percentage of the world's shipping does go through there. It's a relatively small channel. And if you heard anything about this story, you probably saw a commentator come on and just goes over and says, Iran's barely got a navy. This is laughable. And even if they did try it, we'd go out and blow up their navy in one day and that would be the end of it. I don't think so. I don't think that would be the end of it. Now, although I don't think Iran is actually closing the Strait of Hormuz, I think they're just trying to gin up something. They have real problems in their country. If you go and look, you'll find there's been a lot of riots and protests, protesting the kind of strict government that they have there and the dictatorship and the Ayatollah. And, they're kind of looking to focus all this anger at an external threat. So a lot of people are just saying they're pointing it at the United States. But that's not only the case. What they're doing is they're pointing it at Saudi Arabia, their longtime enemy. And let's just play the what-if game here. If the United States decides we don't really get much of our oil from Saudi Arabia anymore, and to be honest, we don't have to get any of it, we can just pay a little bit more from Canada, or stop exporting oil ourselves. We're the largest oil producer in the world now, and we don't have to get involved. And a lot of what Trump ran on was not getting involved in these conflicts like this. So let's go ahead and play the what-if game. What happens if Saudi or Iran closes down the Strait of Hormuz? What would the United States response be? Although I think right now, with Trump in the office and negotiations on with Iran, the U.S. would respond. But if we didn't, you would have to see Saudi Arabia respond with U.S. backing. And then that could get a lot more interesting. And when you throw in the fact of Iran, Russia, and Syria are all going to get together and hold some type of talks about what to do in Syria, but I'm sure a lot more will be discussed. And if Iran gets the backing of Russia and decides to try to close off the Strait of Hormuz, Russia has kind of been poised to take the rest of Ukraine, and they're kind of knocking on NATO's doorstep. This could be a test case to see what the United States response would be to a regional power kind of making a power play. Now, if they do close off the Strait of Hormuz and Saudi Arabia and Iran get into it and really affect shipping, this is really going to affect China and Japan. If you look at the trade routes in Southeastern Asia, which uses most of the Middle Eastern oil now, they're at the end of the shipping lines. Everybody else can get their oil from somewhere else or use different trade routes, but they need that strait. They have to get their oil from Saudi Arabia. And you could end up seeing Asian countries get involved in a dispute over oil between Saudi Arabia and Iran. So it'd be really interesting to see how this plays out. I really feel that Iran and Saudi Arabia are really heading this way, and I don't think the United States will be a major factor other than maybe supplying arms and some intelligence, maybe some Air Force power to keep the shipping lanes ordered. But this is going to be largely a ground battle. And the United States just does not want to get involved into another Middle Eastern ground battle. And it will be interesting to see if Russia decides to take that opportunity to expand further. Again, I've referenced Peter Zion in one of my other videos, and he talks a lot about the play of oil in the region and kind of what some of the goals of Iran and Russia and China could be in this scenario. And if you really want an in-depth look at it, go ahead and check out his page.